everybody, and welcome into today's episode of the Top Cut YuGiOh podcast. My name is Sunny. I am your host. I am here with my co-host Caleb.
Yo!
And of course, before we get too far in, we're going to go through all of our usual stuff really quickly. So a huge thank you to all of our patrons. So thank you to Austin Johnson, Salix, Kane Martin, Damian Zink, Marshawn Jones, Master of Isa, Mr. Herbie's Witchcrafter Main 2022, Zephyrus, AD, Aaron Gardner, Anthony Lila, Appaloosa is a Floodgate. More on that later. Dank Nugs again, now with Dino DNA, Mountain Man, Myth Oceanus, Owen Alvarado, Pig, Rudolph, Seth Sneaky Links, Chris Myers, MBT's Hard Leg, Ray Powell, Slaking It Up, Sunny Sweet, and Zephyrus. Be sure to check out our Patreon, Discord, and Twitter. All the links are in the description down below. Also, if you are interested in getting our playmat, it is now available on ImperiumDuelist.com. And that's all I'm going to do for today. We're going to move along really quick. Of course, I'm sure you saw it in the episode title. We have the one, the only Pack a Watt here with us today. How are you doing, my dude?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on. I know you guys reached out to me prior, and I'm glad we're able to finally make it happen.
Yeah, dude. It's funny that it's so difficult to schedule things because I know you're incredibly busy, and so are we. I mean, working full time plus trying to do content creations, it is a pain.
Oh, bro, everyone always jokes like, "How do you do it?" And I still can't answer that question, to be honest. It's tough.
As it turns out, sleep is optional.
It is.
My secret is lots of caffeine.
Yeah, caffeine, maybe something else here and there. Whatever you can do to get through the day.
Listen, I don't care how I get the caffeine. Tea, sodas, energy drinks, don't care as long as I get it.
I just drink Red Bull. So
Red Bull is nice.
Yeah, Red Bull goated. So we have a lot of questions here for you and things like that. We also, I'll be honest with you. I know you listened to the Hani episode. We actually want to ask you a lot of the same questions we asked Hani because
sure.
I think that there's a lot to be said for, differing opinions between two high-level players, especially two like you that talk as much as you do. All right.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So I think that something that is often overlooked is when you go into an event. And before I get too far in, before I forget, just since we're live on your channel, I will say we're going to take a few minutes at the very end, and I would love to have your chat participate and ask some questions at the end.
Yeah, sure. That'll be awesome. Let's do it.
Yeah, and
chat.
They can be for me, Caleb, Pack, whatever. But yeah, around the end, we're going to open the forum and ask chat to not go nuts. So, but going into an event, I'm kind of interested to get your perspective on deck choice, whether it be for a format or for an event. Kind of pick your brain a little bit about how you go about actually choosing a deck, because that's something that a lot of people, they go into the game and they just sit down, they say, I feel like playing this today, without actually taking a deeper thought into it and saying, why am I playing this? Am I playing this because it's a good meta call? Am I playing this because of what I expect to see at this exact event? So I feel like there's a lot to be said for that,
Yeah, so that's a great question. So my first event ever that I went to that was like of relative size and I guess caliber of players was the PPG, the Pro Play Tour in Orlando. That was their big national tournaments, and I qualified through a last chance qualifier. And when Simo actually asked me a similar question, he was like, well, how did you decide to play the deck that you played for that event, right? And this is a good way to start, because this will show you, like, I guess, the journey of how I, got better at choosing decks. But my answer at the time was I basically played the deck that I was the most comfortable with, right? And this seems like really obvious and really, standard, but I would highly recommend that if you're newer to the game and you're going to like an event for the first time, play the deck that you're the most comfortable with, right? Like Spiral was an obvious choice for that event. That was the format at the time in 2019, and it was like quote unquote the best deck. It established like insane boards. It just like did so much with so little, and I just didn't feel confident. When I went to the event, I had the entire deck ready. I had the deck. I was ready to play it, and you know what? Like in the back of my mind, I was like, man, I'll be honest, I'm not that confident. Like I don't really know the combos that well. I feel like I'm gonna screw up, and it's one of those decks that's pretty unforgiving. If you mess up, you're gonna make a worse board. You need good technical play to navigate the turn 2s. You need to know how to sequence through hand traps, and quite frankly, at the time, I just wasn't confident enough. So I was like, you know what? Let's pick a deck that I've been playing for the last month, and that was Altergeist, right? And so for me, like being able to play the deck that I knew the most, the deck that I felt like I had a really strong understanding of, was super rewarding, because I got to basically like do a lot of like the cool plays that people never really think of in Altergeist. Like for example, when you activate Faker's Effect, like there wasn't a lot of people at the time that summoned Country off of it, and that actually won me the finals, actually, if you watch the replay back. And it's like the small stuff like that where I'm just like, man, like I'm so glad I played a deck that I was comfortable with, because it's a lot easier to see success with it. So that's my first piece of advice. And then after, I feel like you get more comfortable as a duelist, and you feel like you have improved your technical play to a point where you can play any deck. I would say the next step is to figure out the deck that is the best meta call for an event. And that's a very hard question to answer, right? Because, you know, you don't know exactly when you like what people are going to play when you show up to an event. You don't know what the meta is going to be like. But for me, the way I figured it out is I study, like, you know, I watch, like, people won't believe me when I say this, but I watch all the local deck profiles, like the ones that people like kind of like do well, like the case tournaments on the weekends, like stuff like that. Like I watch a lot of those, and because, you know, even if like they're not like known players, I still watch them, because they always give, like, even the people who like aren't like quote unquote known, like they always have some sort of insight that I find really interesting sometimes. And it also kind of nice to understand, like, you know, what are people's heads at, like what are people playing, and you get a general idea of like the meta that way. And afterwards you can build your deck to adapt, I would say. You also, like, because I feel like I play a lot of competitive Yu-Gi-Oh, I have a general idea of like where most players are at in terms of like their deck choice, even from a time perspective, right? The majority of players that are playing the game don't have a lot of time to dedicate to you know, these like these decks. So a lot of most people will usually play the easier deck, or like the deck that I feel like is straightforward. Like that's why you typically like see a lot of Alistair decks sometimes when you go to like big tournaments, because it's, you know, relatively easy to pick up, and, you know, it's not like to no surprise. And then you have like the obvious like tier 1 decks, right? That people will show up with. So and that's how, like, I guess like the last YCS I decided to play like DDDs, where when no one was looking at the deck at the time, I played it because I knew that it had an advantage, just because people didn't bother to take the time to learn the deck. So I had an advantage where like the bluffs that I could do with the deck and the way I play the deck is a lot scarier, because people are afraid. Like, you know, if I normal summon Kepler, a lot of people would kind of like be uneasy because it says search a card, right? And a lot of people typically would ask the first card that you summon, so you can take a lot of like the assumptions and like the notions that, you know, Yu-Gi-Oh players have and abuse it. And then it's a deck that can play a lot of hand traps, because I know that a lot of people are playing a lot of these like crazy wombo decks, just quite frankly because it's way more fun, right? So I can acknowledge that a lot of players just want to play like the wombo deck, like the brave cards, the snow cards, because those are like the really, really fun cards about the deck. And quite frankly, the brave decks are really easy to like play, if that makes sense, because you activate rights, you normal red rose, and it doesn't really take much quote-unquote like skill to develop your board, if that makes sense. So I knew that a lot of people would be on like some sort of brave engine or some sort of deck that requires like a lot of bricks, for that reason. So that's why I decided to play like a 12 hand trap deck, because I knew that if I would draw 2 against that deck, they most likely lose the game, because they don't have a real backbone supporting the engine. Like it's a pile, right? Like it's a bunch of random cards put together. So when you disrupt them, they don't have anything to follow up on. You know, like it's just like half the time they go and activate rights and just attack next turn. Like it's actually crazy. Like their only follow-up card, their only grind card is DP. But usually when you
Right.
draw 2 disruption, they don't even get to DP. And so like, even if they hand trap you a bunch of times, like decks like DDD and Sword Soul can outgrind after hand trapping multiple times, because I have like Dark Contracts, and like the Sword Soul deck has like 10 U cards.
Right.
So,
right.
so that was a long answer. But basically, it's like, first play a deck that you're comfortable with if you're newer to the game, and after you get more comfortable, I would say try to study what people are playing and then build a deck to beat that. Because there are times where you can play really good decks that everyone else are playing and do well with them. But I feel like when I'm trying to not only top the event but win the event, I want to have some sort of competitive edge. And whether
right.
that's playing the Fiber Sword Soul deck that I think like it was only my team that was on it at the time, or playing like DDDs, or playing even LCSs. Like I remember the first event that Dytron was legal, it was only me and Jesse that played the Dytron deck at that event. Same thing with Virtual World. Like it was me and like everyone else, I think from WAF that was playtesting the Virtual deck, but no one else playtested it. So I was able to beat.
I remember.
Yeah.
I remember when you played that Virtual World deck. After the event, you were like, "Yeah, nobody knew what any of these cards did."
Yeah, exactly. And it was so crazy because like I think the thing that I try to do is, if you watch like my streams, I was actually testing Virtual World on stream the week before the LCS. Same thing with DDDs. I test that deck on stream for 2 weeks straight, like 2 weekends back to back. So I think what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to show the progression of how like I pick these deck up and I take it to like actual events. Like I'm not just like doing it just like for content. It's more like this is like literally like the regimen, or this is like my routine of how I would prep for like an actual event, right? So I don't know if anyone have like paid attention to that, but that's, if you watch like my streams, or people who've been watching my streams, they would see that like I literally take the decks that I'm literally showing on stream to like these actual events. It's not just like just for talk, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. I've personally noticed that a lot of times, like, you were hyping up DDD on stream for a couple of weeks before the YCS. So when you said that you were going into a feature match, I think round like 9-ish, and you said that hey, it's gonna be leaked because I'm on feature anyway, but I'm playing DDD. I was like, that actually kind of makes sense,
Yeah. Right.
But that kind of leads me into the next question, which is, when you go into these events, do you find yourself choosing a deck? Do you prioritize power over consistency, or consistency over power? Because I feel like a lot of players might look at a deck and say, yeah, but look at the power ceiling of this deck. Or they'll choose a deck and say it's so incredibly consistent, but it doesn't quite have that power ceiling, right? So is there a way that you prioritize these things, or maybe gauge something when you go into an event like, I just kind of need to play for the meta? Because I know when we were talking with Hani, he said that part of the reason that he chose the Sword Soul 10E Fiber deck for this YCS was because he felt like so many people were playing decks that ran, like a gajillion bricks, that to go into an event running a deck, like you said, with like 12, 14 hand traps, plus the consistency of opening godly every hand, just that consistency was the edge, right? So I was wondering, which of those you kind of prioritize.
I agree with Hani's logic here, because he and I tested quite a bit together. But yeah, I prioritize consistency. And this sounds like crazy, but I think the mentality that players have in the game is that, let's build the best board possible and let's just wombo combo, right? But the thing is, like, some of these boards that people are already making are like already winning. It just almost feel like win more to play the Glass Cannon deck, right? Because the board I make with DDDs is already winning. If someone else makes, like, someone can make a better board than what I do with DDDs for sure, but my full combo and their full combo are both winning boards. So with that in the back of my head, I realized I don't need to do the most to win. Like, a humble board is actually enough sometimes. You have to just know how to use them correctly, right? And that's why, like, there was a game that I played this past weekend at the Goofy Gauntlet where my opponent went DP pass, and that was enough to beat me with hand traps. Like, DP pass with like 1 hand traps, 2 hand traps, that was enough. Like, I couldn't beat that, right? And like trying to make like Baron, Scythe, DPE, like with Herald, all this stuff is, yeah, sure, it's winning, but it feels like it's more Overkill, if that makes sense. Like, you can make that
Right,
board,
right.
you can make like an easier board with anything else, and you're already winning. Like, there was a game at this past weekend there, I got Valored, I got Ash, I got Dropleted, and I still won the game because I ended on the DDD trap card Headhunt, right? But these are the types of these are the types of, I guess, like the mentality that I have now as I start playing more is that, you know, consistent decks I feel like are just overall better in the long run. Just because when you're playing 10, 11, 12 rounds, which YCSs typically are, you need to be able to win your games by just drawing normal, right? And you feel like you're more in control when you can actually try to play. When you break, there's not really much you can do. Like, I'm sure there's like some ways where maybe you can, you know, make a miracle happen of like the worst hand possible. Like, I've had a lot of the games where that has happened. But I just want my deck to be as consistent as possible for an event like a YCS because they don't happen all the time. And if I'm getting to play this YCS like once every month or once every 2 months, then I want to play the deck that gives me the highest chance of not only topping the deck or topping with it, but also winning. And I think, like, for me, like, yeah, you can top with like a tier 1 deck that's like Glass Canyon, but I feel like there's more luck involved, and I want to reduce those type of variants as much as I can, and rely more on, like, you know, just better technical play, because I feel like relying on variants is just too, like, it's too risky. Like, I don't know. So I couldn't do it. That's why I couldn't play the 12 brick decks, because like there were hands that I was drawing where it was just like really, really bad, and I also just ran the math on it. Like, I forgot what the number was, but it was like really high. Like, I think it was like 70 or 80% in almost every hand. You're gonna draw 1 brick going first, and sometimes that's enough. So yeah,
fair enough. That's fair enough. Are there any decks in past formats that you can think of where consistency was really evident over a higher power ceiling?
Like past format, I'm trying to think of like a good example.
Even in like the last year or two, you know.
Deck where consistency was better.
For me, the thing that kind of comes to my mind
Right.
is I felt like the Tri-Brigade Zodiac build was like incredibly consistent, and Drytron had probably a higher power ceiling, but you know.
I would agree with that. Yes, that's a great example. I think that was at the first YCS, remote YCS. Yeah, where everyone was playing Tri-Brigade with a lot of hand traps, and it made like Apollo Revolt, right? And that was their inboard. But like I said, that was enough. You know, like Apollo for 2 with Revolt is weirdly enough to win. Just because, like, you know, you can answer any attack on the Appaloosa, and then you have 2 to 3 Appaloosa negates, which are usually enough. Dragon Link is a pretty consistent deck. I think, like, for the most part, usually consistent decks are pretty good. It's like, I think, like, the thing that people underestimate is that consistent decks don't mean that the deck doesn't make a good board. Like, I remember when Dragon Link would pass on like Hermetic Seal Tidying, right? and that was a winning position board wise, right? Because it prioritized like recovery, while like having disrupts. And I personally like decks that have disrupts that are multi-layered. So not just front heavy, but also like there's something in the back row as well, right? Like, for example, DDD. That's why I like the deck a lot. Like Sword Soul, I like it a lot because there's Blackout, there's Headhunt, there's Tidying in like, you know, in the Dragon Link deck, right? Like, it doesn't just put up monsters as its form of disruption, but it has something in the back row as well. So it's a lot harder to crack those type of boards. Like Virtual with Chuche, for example, too. Like those are the type of decks that I really like because it's like multi facets. Like, it's, and as you know what's crazy, like, I think those types of decks are what's healthy for the game because they aren't necessarily disrupts that make it so that you can't play the game ever, but they give you a chance to play and break the board.
Right.
So what I mean by this is, like, Chuche is like, you know, a pop, and then you have like the virtual board, which was like some, like, I'm talking about like post VFD. You have like Shenshin Chuche, right? Like, there are a lot, like, you get to play still, like, you can still try to play the game, and you have to like kind of like navigate your way, because I think those type of disruptions forces you to actually play instead of floodgates, right? Like, the floodgates are like crazy.
So
yeah.
Funny you should mention floodgates.
Okay, so this is, I hate to cut you off here,
Yep.
but this is, we need your help settling a debate.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so I'm sure you heard it when I read off the patron names. And this has been a debate going in our Discord server for almost a year now, basically since the creation of the server.
Okay.
And I'll accept your answer as the end-all answer.
Okay. Oh God, that's a lot of pressure.
Yeah. Hundreds of people are listening to this. Okay. So, here's the question. Is Appaloosa a floodgate?
In a way, yes. In a way, yes. I actually think
Okay.
Appaloosa should be banned, believe it or not. I'm actually
Okay.
I actually support Appaloosa being banned because of how easy it is to make.
agree
And
with that.
it's a card that if you think about like Nibru, right? The card was literally designed to make it so that it kept combo decks in check. Ironically enough, with the release of Appaloosa, a lot of these decks rely on Appaloosa like as an extra deck card to beat the Nibru, if that makes sense. Like there's like I feel like Appaloosa is like way too generic, to be honest. Like it's actually like I think it got worse because of the base engine. But before the
Right.
base engine, before like the not the base engine, I'm sorry, the
adventure package?
the venture package, like it's so like it is like it was actually like, why do you think Appaloosa for 3 negates with Revolt was so broken? Like
Yeah, it was insane.
like bro, like I couldn't like there's like you couldn't even beat that half the time.
Yeah, if you're playing Drytron, it's an FTK.
Yeah, it's like disgusting how good it was. But I don't
So,
know.
My counterpoint to that is, I would say a floodgate is a continuous effect that that blankets an entire mechanic or
Yeah.
something of the sort,
Right.
right? So, I'd say like Droll, Lancia, those are floodgates. IO, Skill Drain, obviously, but to me,
Peekaboo,
yeah.
goes
Yeah.
match.
So,
Exactly.
and I don't think, I kind of agree with that. Like, I don't think it's a floodgate, but I think it's like bannable, if that makes sense. Like, I would actually see it. I can actually see it being banned just because of like how easily accessible it is to make.
Right, yeah. I definitely see what you mean. I've thought that we got back into the game in 2020,
Yeah.
and I read Appaloosa, and I was like, this card's insane. Why is this
Yeah.
card legal?
Yeah.
So, yeah, no, that's a debate that we've had for the longest. Is Appaloosa floodgate? I'm very firmly
So
on the no
I guess you
side.
can say like it's not a floodgate. I would say, I guess, like I feel like it's a card that makes it very hard for you to play, but it's not a flood, because a flood is like, it's like, how do you even explain it? Like it's like Shifter. It's like something that lasts the entire duration. I guess
Yeah,
Appaloosa
it's a
kind of does,
continuous effect.
but it's just too easy. Like Appaloosa is so crazy, actually. It's insane.
Appaloosa is an insane card, but
Yeah,
I just don't
no-
think it's a floodgate.
Yeah, no arguments here. I agree with it. It's not a floodgate,
Yeah.
but I do find, but there are certain situations where it might as well be.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it comes in and out of formats, but so do cards like Droll and Lancia. You know what I mean?
Mhm. Yeah.
Like, they're great cards, but they just end games.
Yeah.
So, okay, well, you mentioned Appaloosa earlier, and I thought about it,
Yeah.
and I knew that my Discord wasn't going to rest unless I asked you.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
It's just continuing the meme.
Yeah. Got to keep it going. So, now I kind of want to get into your mindset a little bit. So,
Mhm.
we didn't talk about it at the top, but today, right before we started recording, we had YCS's Charlotte, North Carolina,
Yep.
Guadalajara, Mexico, and Bogota, Colombia all were announced.
Yes.
Yes, so huge
yes.
excitement.
Oh,
Actually,
yes.
really
Oh
close.
God, yes.
Charlotte's only 3 weeks away.
Mm-hmm.
That's insanely close.
Yeah. So it kind of makes me wonder, now that you have dates and times for these events and you have this timetable, I know that you say like you've already started testing, right? Like we popped in the stream and you were already testing stuff.
Yep. I have.
But yeah, it kind of makes me wonder, how much time do you put into play testing? And I know that your numbers are probably a little bit skewed because
Mhm.
you play on stream a lot,
Yeah.
and that's basically really, I mean, when you're playing DB on stream, you're basically testing,
Yes.
you know?
Yes.
But
Okay, numbers. So you want like the hours kind of?
you can quantify it however you want.
Okay. Okay. So I would say I like. Okay. So for this last YCS lead, like the remote Vegas one, the only time I played Yu-Gi-Oh was on stream, and it was just because
man.
I was super busy.
Our bot just completely
Okay,
quit recording.
it's okay.
And I realized it happened 7 minutes ago.
Yeah.
Oh.
No.
Yeah. So, will we be able to rip the audio from your VOD
Yes,
and
you
cut
can.
it down?
Yes, you can.
Wonderful.
Okay, we'll just do that.
I'll send you
then.
I'll give you permission to download it, like the access.
Amazing, because the bot is honestly the worst thing ever. I need to get a new computer. But...
Yep, no worries.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm sorry. You can go back into what you're saying about playtesting.
Sure. So, for the last YCS remote Vegas that just happened, the only time I played Yu-Gi-Oh was actually live on stream. So, and I told my chat this, like, the mentality I had when I went to these events. So the first was, I want to give a huge shout out to the two tournaments that I was at. So, I think I'm echoing in the back.
Oh, are you?
Yeah. Or like I hear you playing my stuff in the back.
Oh, I have your stream muted.
Oh, really? Is that me? Okay. I'll just restart. That's okay. Power of editing. The power of editing is crazy. But
Yeah.
okay, so for the last remote duel YCS that happened, for the last remote duel Vegas event, the only time I played on stream was the only time I played Yu-Gi-Oh was actually on stream. So the mentality I had was that, like, when I went to these weekend tournaments, I knew that my weekdays were pretty much booked. Like I work 60 hours a week. Like I have a full-time job. Contrary to popular belief, people think I'm a full-time streamer, but because I stream like insane hours. Like I actually stream like I was streaming the same amount of hours as people who do this for a living, right? So
as someone who works a hard physical outside job all day, the same amount of hours as you, I don't get it.
Yeah, so like a lot of people are probably like, yo, like there's no way Pac works. Like no way. Like he streams way too much, and that's what I'm trying to get into that's what I'm trying to get back into now, like streaming consistently. But for the last YCS, I was really busy. Like I just got promoted at work, and I was working like nonstop. So my weekdays I knew were booked, but I knew that I was due to go to these bigger tournaments that were happening on the weekend. And huge shout outs to Big 3 Deals in Arizona. They bought my ticket and flew me out to play in their tournament. And of course, Unmatched Gaming in Pennsylvania. So those were the two tournaments that I played in. That was 2 weeks. So that was 2 weeks of big tournaments leading up to the third week, which is the YCS.
Yeah.
The first time I played DDDs was at Big 3 Deal, and I got completely bodied. I didn't really, I was doing pretty well, but I didn't really know how to play the deck. I was learning it literally as I was playing against these people, because like I said, I didn't really have time to play test. Like I was on, like, I was waiting for my plane, and I was like looking up like combos. I was doing test hands. Like I was trying to figure it out because I didn't really know how to play the deck. But the mentality I had was that I didn't really care how well I did at these weekend tournaments. I knew that there's going to be a lot of good competition. It was going to be a slightly bigger tournament, like it was going to be bigger than a locals tournament, but smaller than a YCS or smaller than a regional. So it was like really good practice. And I was like, you know what? I don't care how well I do. I could play I could play another deck that I was more comfortable with and maybe try to do better at these tournaments. But I was like, you know what? Instead of trying to worry about how well I did at these tournaments, and play a deck that I was more comfortable with, I'm going to play the deck that I'm actually going to play for the YCS, that I think I might play for the YCS. And that was DDDs at the time. So I streamed the entire event, and I played DDDs, like, and you can see that I was making misplays. I wasn't understanding like some of these interactions, and it comes, right? And that's kind of like what I was trying to show through, like, it was one of the reasons why I stream. Like, I want to show the progression, the journey of what it's like for someone to get better at the game. Because I haven't actually started playing Yu-Gi-Oh that much, like that far ago. Like I started playing in 2019 of July, right? So this is the main reason I streamed, because I wanted to show that progression. And so I played that first weekend with DDs and I got bodied. And then the week after that, I gave it another go. I'm like, you know what? Let's see how much better I could do after that experience. So I did the same thing. I drove over to Reading, Pennsylvania, and I did the same thing. I tried to learn the deck on the way there. I was, making less misplays. I was learning more interactions. Like the first time I played DDs that weekend at Big 3 Deals, I didn't even know how to make Baron. I didn't even know how to make Siegfried in the deck. And Chad will attest to that. Yeah. And then the next weekend after that, I was playing through Nib. Like I was playing through 2-3 hand traps. Like I was like cooking people. Like people were making window against me. I was winning. And I was like, man, like I'm actually learning this deck, and I think I'm getting a lot better with it. But at the same time, I'm still misplaying. And I actually lost top 8 because I didn't know a certain sequence that allowed me to win top 8. And so I ended up losing because of it. But one of the things I do is after these tournaments that I stream for you guys in the chat is I watch all my games over. And that for me is like one of the best ways to improve, because I watch all the things I did wrong. And even the things I thought I did right even the things I thought I did right because I won were things I could still also do better, because I was like, man, I got so lucky I top decked this. I played my hand out so wrong. But the thing is, these things you would never know unless you look over your gameplay. So I'm in quite a fortunate position where I'm able to stream my games so I can look over them. But you could do this on like Dueling Book as well, right? And like if even or another thing that I do is I usually like keep track of all my games I play, and I replay them back in my head to see like, was a play I did correct? Because my opponent flipped droplets at this point in time. Was there a way to play around it? Was there a way that like if I knew or made the correct read that there was droplets, what was the best sequence in at that position at that moment in time to capture the board state? And funny enough, there are actually a lot of like crazy plays that you could do. I coach on Metafy, so one of my students was like coming up to me. He was like, bro, like I don't think there was a way I could ever win this game. So I look over the game back with him, right? And I'm like, well, actually, I think you could have. If you went for this sequence, you actually would have OTK'd him. It's just, and I was talking about like the decision trees, like, as you go through like the steps, you're like, okay, what are the options available to me? What are the plays I could do at this X, Y, and Z time? If I do this X, Y, and Z play, what are the next steps after that? And we went through it together, and we're like, we actually figured out a way to OTK through like the droplets that the guy had, with Sorcel. And those are like those moments of like, epiphany, like insight are like the best, because once you figure them out once, you never forget it. And that ultimately, so like the 2 weekends that I just talked about led up to the YCS. And at that YCS, I was like super comfortable with the deck. Like I felt like I was playing that deck like really well. The game my match 1 was a warm-up, because I was like, I get nerves too. Like it's like any other person. I just you guys just don't see it as much. But I was like a little bit nervous too, because like I said, I'm taking a deck that's arguably very difficult to pilot, and I know that if I make a mistake, it's gonna be super punishing. So it took me like my match 1 to finally settle me in to be like, I think I can actually do this, and I felt like I played some of like my best Yu-Gi-Oh, and I was really happy that I got rewarded for playing really well. Like my deck didn't brick. Like I was, drawing like really good. Like I built my deck really well. Like I felt like I made a really good meta call. I played, I think 6 or 5 Brave Frank that day, and I tooled all of them except 1. And that was the matchup I expected. Like, so, and even as I made Top Cut and I played all the rest of Top Cut out, when I made the top 8 and I lost in top 8, like I wasn't even too disappointed, because I lost to like variance instead of me misplaying. And because like I said, I watched back my games, right? Like that was streamed, and I knew my exact hand at that moment in time. So when I look back, I'm like, you know what? Like how can I be mad that I lost, right? Because you're gonna need a little bit of luck too. So yeah, I was like, yeah, I lost, but I wasn't really too upset. I said GG to my opponent. I'm like, congrats on top, like, to like, moving into the next round, and I moved on, right? Because I was like, and it's so easy. And I guess the point of me saying that is that, you know, it's so easy to get hung over up like your losses or whatever. But I think understanding, is it losing because you messed up or losing because of variance, is, you know, it's important to distinguish, because you don't want to like beat yourself up over things you can't control, but I feel like you want to beat yourself up over things you could control. And you know, you make a mistake is like, you know, or you playing incorrectly, or you sequencing your hand wrong. Those are things that you can control. How your opponent draws, like, you can't really control unless you're cheating. So at that point, I'm just like, you know, it's okay. Honestly, I lost, and it is what it is, right? So I wasn't really too mad. I was really happy that I made top 8. Obviously, I would be happier if I won the tournament, but I was like content because I made the right choice, and I was able to show my chat and like my community that with like practice and like, you know, a lot of hard work, you can also do well at the YCS. Because like I said, I streamed like the 2 weekends that I played this deck with were the 2 times I actually ever played it. And you can ask Nesh as well, because Nesh was helping me the day before with a deck list. Because I was like, bro, Nesh, I was on the Nesh, I was like, yo, bro, like I haven't played since PA. Like I need to, like, so I just steered with him the deck list. But from a technical play perspective, the way I improve was just watching my replays. I didn't actually need to play more Yu-Gi-Oh! I just need to watch over my games and make sure I didn't mess up. And that was pretty much it. So that's my long-winded answer.
Hey, it's at least it was very what's the word?
Knowledgeable.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I got a quick little question for you, real quick,
Yep.
specifically about the DDDs.
Sure.
And you running them.
Sure.
What was the thing that really made you decide to run them? Was it the giant hammer with a rocket attached to it, or the fact that he's a penguin?
No, I wanted to play DDDs because I thought it would be a really good meta call, because no one would know how to hand trap it. So my opponent goes -1 quite a bit, and that's pretty much it. I also think it's actually a good deck. Like, you just have to play it well. And that's basically why. So I was like, you know, so I don't know. It's also Macanex just looks crazy. Like that art is insane. So I had to give it a shot.
Hammer with a rocket.
Hammer with a rocket. Yeah.
We're gonna take just a second to do a really quick ad read.
Sure.
So a huge thank you to our sponsor, ETB Games in Alexandria, Louisiana. They are our locals, and they are your one-stop shop to get everything that you need for Yu-Gi-Oh!, Magic the Gathering, Pokemon, Digimon, any card game that you play. They have binders, play mats, they have deck boxes, singles, steel product, anything that you could need. Also, everything that you need for all your tabletop games like Warhammer, like D&D, Pathfinder.
Yep.
They have the books, the figurines, the paint, everything that you could possibly need. So, moving back into the stream, I also want to ask you, I'm kind of curious about the relationship that you have with being a player versus being a creator.
Yeah, that's a good one. It's tough. It's hard.
Yeah. I think it's really lost sometimes that a lot of times when you get into these situations where you start making content, you start getting into it, and sure, you're always a player, but you run into a situation where you kind of have to think about, well, yes, I'm a player, but I also have to think about content too, right? So kind of a 2-part question. Would you consider yourself a player first or creator first? And the other part is, have you ever found yourself in a situation where you kind of take some time to really focus more on creation as a creator rather than just being a player?
Yeah, so I think I'm a player first. And the reason why I say this is because, like, when I show up to events, you don't see me holding up a camera going like, yo, what's up, YouTube? You know what I'm saying? Because for me, it's like, it's also just my personality. When I'm at events, I'm one of those people that I just want to savor the moment. Like, I wanted to enjoy my time, absorb in my surroundings. And even when I studied abroad in college, so I was in London, and I did the same thing. Bro, I barely have any pictures from when I was abroad. and I was really bad at taking pictures because when I was traveling and you know, soaking all this experiences in and just hanging out and like, you know, seeing sightseeing, all that good stuff, right? Like I just didn't, like, my reaction is not to take out my phone. It's more of like, man, let me just enjoy where I am. And I feel like it's very similar to how I approach content creating with YuGiOh, which I honestly feel like, ironically enough, I need to do more of that, you know, filming and more of that, like, recording, because I don't do it enough.
Yeah.
But yeah, when I'm at like events and stuff like that, right? Like I kind of just like it's funny. My content is literally topping. I probably chose the hardest. Like, I probably chose the worst content space to get into because it's like, you know, like, it's competitive Yu-Gi-Oh, right? It's like it's the one area where, like, you know, it's very results oriented, you know, so you have to like do well. You have to do well, and then you have to also like you know, like, you have to go out, record these games, show people what it's like, you know. And I think that's why the IRL streams is doing pretty well, like, at these big tournaments. Like, I feel like I get like double the people when I go to like IRL tournaments or events, because a lot of people either haven't been to events or anything like that. But, you know, I'm always more focused on my game, like whenever like I'm streaming IRL stuff or anything like that at all, because at the end of the day, like, my content is playing really well. And I want to also play well just because I like competitive Yu-Gi-Oh. Like, I like that interaction where you have that epiphany of how you crack your opponent's board, or how you outplay them, or you mind game them into like making the wrong play. Like, those type of interactions, like those types of moments for me are like euphoric. Like, I love it. Like, that for me is like crazy. Because a lot of people think like Yu-Gi-Oh is just like a luck-based game or something like that, and I feel like it's not always like, I feel like luck's involved, but you have to put yourself in the position to be lucky, if that makes sense. And yeah, that's what I like. That's why, like, I like playing the game so much, because like there are some luck involved, but there's a lot of times where like you really can turn the tides of a game based on how well you play, how well you make reads on your opponent's back row, how well you make reads on their hand. Like, that for me is like so fascinating. It feels almost as if I'm playing like a trading card poker game or something. I can't explain it.
I mean, when you look at it, there's actually quite a few players that they don't just play Yu-Gi-Oh, you know. A lot of them play, a lot of higher level players, they also play poker pretty competitively, you know. I mean, it makes sense. So that part is like awesome for me. And then I think your second question was regarding like how do you ever balance like choosing to be a creator more than a player? And I would say like, yeah, there are times where like I literally can't, like, you know, go into my like team Discord and play test with them, because I'm like always like, you know, either streaming or anything like that. But I usually try to like fit the two and two together. So like even today, right, like I was gonna try and make the Despia deck work and show how I go about like learning how to play Despias, because it's one, testing for me, but then also two, like content for people who may not know a good way or a good avenue of how to get good with a deck, or how to like pick up a deck for the first time or something like that, right? And so I usually try to mix the two and two together. But yeah, it is very hard to be both a player and a creator, because at one hand you're like, dang, like what's some like content I should do, but then on the other hand you're like, damn, I have a big tournament coming up this weekend, how do I prep for that while also trying to, you know, provide content to people. So it's not easy, to be quite honest, and I still have trouble trying to navigate that, to be quite honest, because there'll be times where like I wouldn't stream for like 2-3 days because I'm in my team's Discord all day, like literally after I finish work, I'm in the team Discord. I'm like, yo, let's figure stuff out. Like let's try to make something happen. Let's talk about like some new cars, some new techs, etc., right? And I couldn't stream, and it's really sucks, because like I really enjoy streaming. Like I really enjoy interacting with the community, the chat.
because like it's very enjoyable for me. But at the same time, it's like, dang, I have this tournament coming up and I want to perform really well because, you know, like my content is about doing really well at Yu-Gi-Oh. So it's like, it's ironic. It's like, damn, I have to take time from streaming to practice for an event. But by taking time from streaming to practice for an event, which is what my content revolves around, you know, which is doing well at events, then it's like, damn, it's like a double-edged sword almost, right? So
Right.
navigating and balancing the two is definitely like really tough, but I think I came to a point where I just try to do both, to be honest.
I think the key is to just get so many feature matches at these remote duel YCSs
Yeah,
that you just end up on stream all the time anyway,
yeah,
right?
true,
Content just
True.
creates itself at that point.
true,
Yeah.
exactly, yeah.
So I want to get a little bit more into the tournament side of things because I feel like something that a lot of people just assume that once you become a player that's on, say, your level or Hani or Rafael Nevin or whoever, right? They just assume that you go into every tournament and that you just are comfortable, right?
Mhm.
But I know personally when I go to tournaments, even though I go to not as many as you, but I go to quite a few, I still get like the jitters, right? And the nerves before at the beginning of round one, you know? I was kind of wondering if you, even at the level, you know, gajillion tops, YCS winner, yada, yada, do you still get those nerves? Do you still get that kind of, that feeling in your stomach right as you're sitting down for round one?
I feel like I get that round one, and I feel like after round one for me is when I pick up. And it might not be believable. I feel like I keep a good poker face, so you can't tell when I'm nervous, but I do like feel it, right? Like there are hands where like I literally draw unplayable and like I'm just laughing with my opponent, right? just so I'll be honest, I do like, and that's like that's the truth about it. Like I do get nervous, but I don't let it like take over, if that makes sense. Like I always try to like keep it pretty tamed, but I feel like I get that all the time. Like I already know, like at YCS Charlotte, when I sit down for round one, I'm gonna have butterflies in my stomach, and
Oh yeah.
and it's like, and you know what's even crazier? When you're on feature match, or when you're in, and then that's even crazier, and then when you have to play a friend, that's even crazier.
Yeah.
It's not, it's, and that's why like I feel like streaming helps, because I get less nervous being in front of people and stuff like that, and I feel like that develops over time. And so like I get less nervous now, and it comes with like the confidence and all that good stuff for sure. And then also like just, you have to just be like confident but not cocky, if that makes sense. Like it's a good mix of both, you know, like trust in yourself that the hours you put in is going to pay off. Like, you know, trust in yourself that like all the stuff you did will help, you know. I mean, it would make sense if you're nervous if you didn't really practice a lot or you didn't really play that much. That makes sense. But I feel like if you've been grinding, if you've been putting in the work, you've been putting in the effort, just trust yourself that you would, you know, do well. And I think that will go a long way, because I think a lot of people are insecure sometimes, and you know, it's like a good mix. Like you have to be like a little bit confident but not like over the top, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's I would say like that's the best balance.
Yeah.
So, in your opinion, how do you decide? Well, not really opinion; it's more of a decision tree thing here. When to shotgun an effect, like a Lancia, or going to shotgun DPE to pop the scythe, that kind of thing. Like, how, in your opinion, how do you kind of go about that kind of decision tree?
Yeah, I think like it depends decks per deck. Like, you know, you have to like read, like for example, like whenever you play a card, like it, you know, I was actually just talking about this on stream. It's so funny. I was actually just saying like, damn, how do I get punished, right? So like I was just playing against NBT and he was playing Flunders, and he activated Pot of Prosperity. So he went Shifter as his first action, which makes sense. And then he goes Pot of Prosperity for 6. My only hand trap is Ash Blossom. So in the back of my head, I was thinking, how do I get punished by not ashing this? Because against the Flunder matchup, it's typically correct to hold the Ash Blossom for Eaglin. That's usually the best bet. And it's so funny. In my head, I'm like, the only way I get punished is if he rips the field spell and he already has Eaglin in his hand. Because once you chain block the Eaglin, Ash doesn't work, and you get the Big Bird anyways. And if you Ash the Robina that comes after the Eaglin, he can just use his regular normal summon to tribute over the 2 birds, and he still ends on the full board. And ironically enough, I didn't Ash it because I'm like, I was like, I didn't want to take too long to think because I'm playing against MBT. It's like a friendly. It's like not that serious. But it was in the back of my mind, and I literally said this right afterwards, and my chat was asking me, like, what do you mean by how do you get punished? And I was just about to explain it, but that's basically my thought process. So in terms of, like, your question about Lancia, how do you know when to shotgun an effect? How do you know when to, like, use cards? I always think about, like, the pros and cons, about, like, how do I get punished? Like, in what way is this not correct, right? And
yeah,
when you evaluate the pros and cons, I feel like that helps you make your decision the best. So, there's no clear-cut answer. Like, I think you'll be crazy to be like, you always shotgun Lancer, you always do this. Because the answer is it depends, and it might not be the answer that people are looking for. But I would say it, like, really depends. Like, for example, against PK, right? Like, sometimes, if Lancer is my only hand trap, sometimes I play a little bit risky, where I let them make 2 level 3s to send Aquamancer, and then I Lancia them. And, it might not even be correct. But sometimes you change your hand trapping method, or you change your play style depending on the person you play against, as well, right? Like, sometimes maybe you make the read that have a good or a bad hand just off their composure, when they draw their first 5 cards. Like, I actually, like, I talked about this in one of my coaching sessions with one of my, like, students on Metafy. He was like, how do you, like, make good reads? And I explained that I actually study the way my opponent plays in game 1, and the way they, like, if they're overly aggressive or they're conservative in the way they play their hand out. And I really, like, focus on that, Like, I really pay attention, like, hey, are they playing, like, kind of aggressive? Or are they playing kind of ignorant? Or are they just playing the way they are because their hand doesn't warrant a way to play through interruption? And I use that knowledge and that information to better read them in the game 2s and 3s in terms of, like, how do I hand trap correctly, etc. So I would say that, like, paying attention to your opponent, the way they play, is really important. And I would also say that, like, it really depends on the deck you're playing against, the meta. It's Gamma in the main deck if you shotgun Lancer, etc. So yeah, that's what I would say about that.
Yeah. So something else that I think that a lot of people struggle with on a regular basis is crafting a sideboard going into the event. We haven't talked about this, right? No? Am I?
Nope.
Okay.
No, not yet.
Making sure we haven't already discussed this. So when you're going into an event and you're building a deck, crafting sideboard, I'm kind of wondering, when you're planning that sideboard, how do you pick the hand traps that you main versus you side, right? Because I would say something like Lancia is a great, incredibly impactful card, but you'll never see somebody main it hard, basically ever, right? I mean, sometimes sure, but, like, it's very rarely mained. Same thing with, like, Droll, right? They're great, super impactful cards, but people just don't really main them for whatever reason. Or things like Cosmics, main versus side. It's so dependent, right? So I'm just kind of wondering if there's any specific evaluations that you make to decide where you kind of place these.
Yeah, so I would say that I would say the first thing when crafting a sideboard, and, like, they decide, like, for example, what hand traps to main, side, etc. When you go to, like, an event, like, let's say we take the YCS for example, because there's one coming up in Charlotte, so this might be more applicable as a response. But when you go to a YCS, on average, when you go to a YCS, you play, like, 50%, like, tier 1 decks, like decks that you would expect, right? And then you have like all these rogue decks, and you'd be surprised that, like, you would think that at a YCS, the people that are showing up are all tier 0 high level players, but there's a lot of players that just show up just because they want to play, their pet deck, right? And you have to be ready for those rogue decks as well. because Hani will be the first to tell you that he was losing to Earth Machines because he didn't know what the cards did, and that's gonna happen. But I like know all these rogue decks because I'm one of those people that I find a lot of fascination just playing a lot of different decks. It was the same thing in Hearthstone for me. Like I had like 10 different decks built because I feel like I get really bored really fast, and when I pick up a deck and learn it really well, I'm like I want to move on to the next one. And I want to play another deck. I want to play another deck because that's what keeps this game interesting for me. The multitude of decks is what keeps this game interesting to me. If I had to play like Salmon Greats for a year, I don't know if I would be playing at the time because I would probably be switching every deck. Just because like I just like find it more enjoyable to learn the different play styles and like how different deck functions. Like that for me is super interesting. That's for me is what makes Yu-Gi-Oh really fun. And so there's that component. And I would say that when you show up to a YCS, the reason why a lot of people don't main deck Droll or Lancia is because it doesn't cover the most generic matchups. Like it doesn't have good coverage, and coverage of matchups when it comes to like non-engine slots are really important because certain cards are really good in certain matchups and certain cards are really bad into that certain matchups. So you want to have a wide diversity. That's why Ash is like arguably one of the best hand traps ever made, because every deck searches, every deck does some sort of like sending from deck to grave, and it's like almost always in everyone's main deck because it covers every matchup. You would never go wrong having Ash in your main deck. Sometimes it's not correct to main deck Ash because of the format, but at least in this format, like Ash just covers everything. You cover all your bases, and when you go to a big tournament where you don't know what you're gonna play against, you might play against a Sorcerer player, but you could also just be playing against Flunder, right? And Ash is a very good card into that matchup. And
I think that kind of almost falls back into like consistency versus power selling, right? Because sure, in the matchups where it works, something like Lancia is incredibly impactful.
Yep.
But when you think about Ash, it's more consistently good against the field.
Yes, exactly. The other thing I would say about it is you mentioned that like Droll and Lancia aren't always main deck, but that doesn't mean it shouldn't be sometimes, right? Because it like I said, let's say on average you would say like a YCS would be like I said 50% like meta, like 50% rogue. Maybe it's like 70% meta, to be honest, like 30% rogue, or like tier 2/rogue decks and 30%. What if you make the meta call that like a lot of people will be on a certain type of deck like Sword Soul? There's almost an argument to even main deck Token Collector, so maybe you get rewarded for a main deck choice even though it's not good into other matchups, but you're willing to take the L, like the rogue decks game 1. But your thing is you're building your deck for Top Cut because you feel that Top Cut would have a high representative Sword Soul, right? That also might go into your factor when you're building a deck. But these are like the decisions that you have to like make as you're building your deck, because it's like I'll give you the example. After the YCS, I played in a Goofy Gauntlet this past weekend, and the only things I changed were my hand traps, my non-engine cards, because I felt like the engines were already pretty established. It was already really, really good. I just changed my hand traps to fit, the meta, the meta that I expected it to be. And in the profile, I explained it. I talk about like why I main decked what the cards I did, why I decided to change my side deck in terms of hand trap count around, or like what hand traps I decided to sideboard specifically, because I'm more scared of certain matchups that I think will be more popular, or I'm more like convinced that more people will be on this. And but that's something that it's almost a guess, like it's a guess, right? Because at some point you never really know, but you want to make the most educated guess as possible. And when you build that correctly, you get super rewarded, because everyone always talks about how like your side deck comes in games 2s and 3s, but in a format where hand traps are very important, that game 2 and 3 is very, very like crucial. Like I'm talking about, like I build my deck to win game 1s because I know that game 2s, when I go second, I want to be able to just blow them out and just 2-0, to be honest.
Yeah.
And that's basically what happened at the YCS for me, to be quite honest. Like I build my deck to win game 1. Game 2, I had put in 20 hand traps and I just 2-0 them. And that was my game plan. Like I knew that like that was my strategy, and I just went with it.
Yeah.
So like figure out your winning strategy, right? Like figure out like what is your deck designed to do? What is your goal in these matchups? Like what are you hoping to accomplish, right? That's why I never understood why people sided like burn cards, because are you expecting to go into time? You could if you're playing a deck that like a lot of people would read or not really understand. But like I never would side deck a burn card, because if you play your deck normally at a normal speed and you scoop strategically, you should almost never go into time. Unless you build your deck or your game plan is to win in time, which at that point, that's like a whole nother conversation. You know what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
that's my thoughts on that.
Yeah, for sure. I know Hanko Chow is in the chat. That's right. I'm still reading chat. And he mentioned that it's kind of just like choosing hand traps. Sometimes it can almost be a little bit like gambling almost, right?
Yeah.
Like you just kind of roll the dice on what you're going to see.
Right. But that's why you play the most generic hand traps, because it's not gambling when they cover everything, right? Like because like
Imperm at.
Yeah, like Imperm is like Imperm, Veiler, like Nibiru, like like Ogre. Everyone's playing Brave Engine, so Ogre covers like almost literally any deck that has Brave in their deck. And it's just because you never want like dead cards, pretty much. At the end of the day, like, you have to get a little bit lucky, because like it's math, right? Like you either, like for me, like it was 12 and 43 or 42. It's like 48%, 47, 46%. It's either you draw 50% of the time game one or you don't. But hey, I win the dice roll 50% of the time too, right? Or at least I hope to.
Right.
It was more like 25%.
Yeah.
But
yeah. Depends on the day.
Yeah, but it's like at the end of the day, you have to get a little bit lucky. But like I said, I was saying this from the beginning of the podcast, like you have to put yourself in the best position, the best scenario to get the luckiest, right? Like, drawing 2 hand traps when I play 12 and 42 isn't sacky. It's like, I built my deck because I designed it. I wanted to do that, that I wanted that to be the case. So, like put yourself in the position to like do the best. Like, when you play like 6 hand traps and you're like, damn man, Sag, I didn't draw a single one. You're like, well, you didn't build your deck at the best you could, right? So, or you didn't build it as optimal for that event, right? Because it changes event per event too. Like what's optimal deck wise for an event changes the next event. What certain cards changes as well, right? So, like one of the best example I did was like for the YCS. I think I could be actually the only person crazy enough to not main deck or side deck a single back row removal. And it rewarded me greatly. I didn't play a single back row deck. My side deck was completely for every version of Brave / combo deck possible out there. I didn't respect any back row decks, and I knew that my engine was good enough to beat the back row decks. It was like playing Danger Thunder into Salamangreats. Like the Orthros with Thomas and like Dark Contracts were just like really, really good grind cards into any Floodgate, any LH setup. So, it's like making those reads, like making those, because a lot of people just when they build decks or when they do side decks and stuff like that, they use a lot of like preconceived notions of, you should always have like 6 back row removal cards in the side, or you should always have like certain amounts of hand traps or all this stuff. And it's like, think like you always have to question, does it actually make sense? Like, is the norm actually correct, right? Like, and I think when you start evaluating it more and more, and you start thinking about it more and more, you're like, man, maybe it doesn't make sense to play back row removal because of the Brave and because of the adventure aspect, because of the adventure impact on the meta, right? Less people are playing trap decks because of that. And maybe someone can even even meta game me and be like, you know what, I'm gonna play a trap decks because I know no one's siding it, right? And that's like the really, really interesting, really, really cool part about Yu-Gi-Oh. It's like, making the right meta call, etc., etc. So I think that is like what makes the game also really fascinating, and it makes it more multi-layered and more multifaceted than people would expect, right? Because these are things that people like, I feel like don't really think about as much, but I feel like it's that small piece of like things that you can do to get an advantage, or that small piece of competitive advantage, whether that's from deck building perspective or technical play perspective, that really, really, I think pushes you from, the average player to the top player, and then the player that don't top to actually topping too.
Okay, that's perfect. That's a great answer.
Yeah.
Um, I'm actually really enjoying kind of like the long form answers because
Yeah, it's tough because like it's not like, you know, because like, I'm like doing these long answers because there's no like real like one sentence, two sentences to encapsulate, you know, like the best way to answer it. It's tough. It's like these are really good questions. They're really tough questions, and that just shows how complex the game is, right? Like,
absolutely.
I think
yeah.
for all the players that are like entering the game through Master Duel and stuff like that, they're gonna quickly realize that like there's a lot of stuff that goes into what makes top players. And that's like, and that's the journey. That's the cool part about it. Like anyone, I truly believe anyone can get really good if they really want to. You know, like I felt like I got into like a certain level. Like I feel like I got good just because I really wanted it and I put in the hours and the time for it. And I was able to get into like testing circles and teams because I think people acknowledge that. I was like, man, this guy's putting in the work. Like, who is this dude, right? And basically, they gave me a shot. And so I feel like for anyone who is aspiring to get better, get into like and meet better players and all that good stuff is, you know, you got to also prove yourself by yourself first before you can just have someone that can coach you or like help you, like a good test group, right? Because
I think
that's what I did.
Everything.
Yeah, because your test group is everything. But I feel like the way to get into that is to first do it by yourself and put yourself in the best position first, right? Like you have to also show people that you can add value. So I think I went from someone who was like basically taking notes to providing notes, basically. I don't even know the best way to say it, but and the thing is, I still, and that's not to say that like I'm like, you know, basically teaching all these people now, but it's like I'm still a student of the game. Like I'm still learning, and I think that's what I feel like will serve me and a lot of players who are looking to get better in the long run. Is that like, you know, don't get too like cocky or don't get like too confident. Like, you know, always try to learn, always try to get better, and like just be humble, because that will actually make you better. You know, like being like, yo, like I'm insane, all this, whatever, you know, like you might joke with that with friends saying like, oh man, I'm insane. Yeah, I'm playing out of my mind. I mean, I always say that. But like in reality, it's like, you know, just be humble, like learn as much as you can, just get better, all that good stuff. Like that will serve you like miles, like leagues ahead.
Yeah. There's a fine line between quiet confidence and arrogance.
Yeah, exactly. Yep, exactly.
So, I'm not taking up too much of your time. Am I? Got one or two more questions?
Yeah, sure. Of course, we had a couple more questions. Let's do it.
While we're here, if you are in chat and you have questions, now is the time. So let's go ahead and get some questions from the chat. And after I ask this next one, we'll, you know, go to the chat. So I know that you haven't been playing the game actually for the longest time, right? It's kind of crazy to see your progression and your growth from a newer player to literally probably one of the top 5 players in the game right now.
That's
right?
too kind. I don't think I'm the top 5, but I appreciate that. And I actually, I mean it. I feel like I have a long way to go before I get really, really crazy. But I feel like I'm working there. So, but I appreciate that. It means a lot.
So, I think it's kind of like you just said. You know, you're really a student of the game. You study all of these things for not just the meta, right? You don't just study these things that are relevant right now. You also go back and you study past formats.
Yes, I love it. I love past formats.
Exactly. I know that, you know, the announcement for Time Wizard format, I know that you've been really big on the 2011 Plant Synchro format, 2014 Nationals, Edison, whatever. So it makes me wonder, what is it that draws you into all these past formats? What is it about them that fascinates you? And how do you think that playing these past formats can benefit players that are really wanting to learn not just the history of the game, but also get better at the game right now?
I find it so funny that like even when I play GOAT, right? Like which, you know, I think GOAT is like so funny because sometimes like it's so sacky, but there's a lot of like really cool outplay and a lot of really cool mind games you can do in these like retro formats, because there's a lot more turns. and you have to like pay attention to cards. You have to keep track of like in what order did people play their cards in which, like, why did this guy set this turn 2 but not turn 1, right? Those types of like reads of critical thinking from retro formats are great brain exercises. That's why this past weekend when I was in Connecticut, or whenever Hani and I travel together, we always play retro together, because it's such a good brain exercise. Like, you're constantly trying to make the right reads, like and when you make those reads correctly, bro, like your opponent feels like shit. Like, they just felt like, it's just really, really OP. And that same type of like reads, critical thinking will apply to modern or like current TCG as well. Like, like understanding how your opponent plays and what order they play their cards in. It's a little bit different because the game's a lot faster now, but like, you're able to like pick apart their hand, pick apart like what cards they can have set, in what order they play them. Like, for example, right, like I remember I was playing against a guy who was playing Sword Soul, and I activated a card in one of the imprint columns. He had 2 sets. I activated one of the imprint columns, and the guy said thinking, right? So I had no monsters, so the guy couldn't chain imprint even if he wanted to. But that made me think a little bit. I'm like, wait, is there an imprint back there? Because I just wanted to see how he would respond, because a lot of people always get really excited when they're like, damn, I can imprint this guy's column and screw him, right? So I was like, I did it just intentionally, just to like see how he would react. And then when he picked it up and looked at it, I'm like, okay, I think that actually might be imperm. I'm gonna Vishuda bounce the other back row, which I think is blackout, because that's a hard card to play through. And don't get me wrong, like, I could be completely wrong in the reads. Like, you know what I'm saying? I could be completely wrong. But I was studying how this guy was playing game 1. So I was like, like the way he sets his card, I was actually paying attention, because the guy actually set his imperm and blackout in the same column that happened in game 1. And I'm like, yo, there's no way he does it again, right? And he did. He set it in the exact same order too. And when I saw that, I'm like, oh shoot, I'm pretty confident there's a blackout in the other column. And so when I Vishuda bounced the blackout, that was actually the winning position for me, because when I was analyzing my hand, I just could not, I couldn't beat it. I couldn't beat the blackout. It was just it was a card that was the most absurd on his end board. And so but because of that, I was able to 2-0 him. Or sorry, yeah, I was able to 2-0 him because of that. Because he went first game 1, and then game 2 went first to the end. And I thought that was so interesting. But these are like the type of things that, like, I feel like I feel like really helps you win games that you shouldn't, because you're like, it turns less of the it also makes it's less variance too, if that makes sense. Of
course.
And that's why I like retro formats, because retro formats, like when I was playing 2014 Nationals, right? Like, you have to make sometimes you can't just pop a random back row, because Hat was a very popular deck. There's like there's Moral Talk in the back row potentially, right? So you have to decide and read, which back row is the artifact and which back row is actually real. And like, as you play your turn, as you play your hands out, the thing that I always tell a lot of people that coached with me on Metafy, I was like, every card prompts a certain interaction, and as you play your cards, your goal should be, especially in like the slow formats, to understand a little bit more about what they have in the back row, a little bit more about what they could have in the hand, what they could have set, right? That should be your goal. Like, you should play cards with purpose, to pick apart and make the right reads, right? Like Hani, I remember when he and I were playing Go, like, he was saying like, damn, I really wish I didn't say thinking on that effect, because I just gave away what the back row was. And I mean, he could also be metagaming me, but sometimes like these things are instinctual. It's almost habit. Sometimes you can't control it, right? So it's what people like, consider tells. So you have to sometimes also train yourself to not like fall into your tells for like reads and stuff like that as well, right? So and that's why like I love retro formats. I think like the component of like critical thinking and the longer turns, like the more back and forth, where like I feel like the reads were actually like those type of things are like crazy for me. Like I love that about retro, and I really enjoy it. So, like, don't get me wrong, there are some like degenerate like there's some like degenerate formats in retro, right? For sure. But I think like Edison 2011, like Nationals 14, like Go, like those are really.
Is there one that you think is the best one to play?
I don't think there's a best one. I think all these formats teach you something differently, and they all like warrants different playstyles.
Right.
You know, like how you play a Mermill deck versus how you play a Sylvan deck in 2014 is very different. Like how you play a Warrior deck versus how you play a Chaos Control deck in GOAT is very, very different. But that's why I like playing all these different types of decks within those formats too. Like I don't just stick to just like, you know, like for example in Edison, I have a zombie deck, a Diva zombie deck, but I also have a hero beat deck with like 25 traps, because the way you like play those decks are very different. They require very different skill set, very different type of critical thinking, and they train different parts of the brain. So I like playing them because they offer like different insights. And all, you know, I'm talking about all this stuff that you can get benefit out of, obviously, like, and it seems like it's a lot, and it seems like really hectic, and it seems like it's a pain, but it's also super fun, right? Like I'm saying all this, and it seems like a chore. It seems like, you know, it seems like a hassle to like try to get better because there's so much you have to consider, think about. But the way I approach competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! And like the way I approach getting better at the game is that it's not a chore. It's actually, for me, mind-blowing. It's fun. It's interesting, right? Like when I watch good players play, I'm just like, damn, he played nice. Like it's a sigh of relief almost, because when you watch like feature matches, sometimes like people don't play the best, and you're just like, damn, like, you know, how did that even happen? And like, how did he even make it that far? Like, you know, like no disrespect, but it's like, you know, you made it all the way to like a certain, you know, top cut or something, and all of a sudden you're playing really bad, right? And then there's gonna be those feature matches where you watch and you're like taking notes on how he plays. You're like, wow, he played really insane. He played his hand out perfect into all the back row. And he sequenced in a way that was just like beautiful because it covered all his bases. And you're just like, this is like literally almost like a work of art. You're like, I'm sitting there watching like freaking Van Gogh like paint right now. You know what I'm saying? Like this guy is going in. And like I hope to like, you know, do that or emulate that. And that's why I watch those people play at those level, right? And even the bad feature matches are also a learning experience because you learn what not to do, right? Like, so it's like a really good mix of both, where like, regardless of which ones you watch, like you're both gonna take away something from it. And don't get me wrong, like even the best players make mistakes, right? But I think like there's also a lot of replays where good players make mistakes, and you understand from that, because it might seem a mistake in hindsight, but at that moment in time, off of no cards known, they for some reason must have thought it was correct in some way, right? So trying to understand why they thought that you know, the bad play that we see, you know, hindsight 2020 was actually like in their heads, they probably thought it was the right play. That's why they make that play, right? No one would ever consciously make a bad play. At least I hope not. And so it's even more interesting is when you try to understand, like, you know, why did he make that play even though it like really lost to this? What was he reading, you know? Or was it just an oopsie, right? Sometimes that happens too. And so like when I watch these retro feature matches, I actually watch them sometimes multiple times because they're so enjoyable. But also because like if I drew the hand that he did, how would I start off the sequence? And then I would hit play. And then and someone would go like, okay, they would play this card first, and I would hit pause, and I would think, I'm like, wait, why did he play that card first instead of this card? Because that's what I would do. But the guy I'm watching isn't doing it that way. He's doing it another way, you know. And that like really helped me, you know, ironically enough, get into the minds of how these players functions and what their thought processes are, and I try to emulate some of their thought process in the way I play Yu-Gi-Oh too. And I think that really pushes you to the next level because it makes you more critical and it makes you think more when you make plays, right? Like there's a lot of times where people would be shuffling, looking at their hand, like hand shuffling, looking at their hand, and I could just tell nothing's going through their heads. Like I could just tell. Like the guy's just like shuffling. But there's a lot of times
head empty shuffle. Let's go.
But there's a lot of times where some people actually, like, when they're looking at their hand, you could tell, bro, they're about to F you up.
Yeah.
They're about to screw you, like, bro. Like, I'll give you an example. When you watch Jeff Jones play, right? Like, the way I see his playing style is he will look at his hand, evaluate all his options and the way his opponent would respond, and he would take a little bit more time than normal. So, like, look at this, right? He'll look at it. Look at any feature matches with Jeff Jones. He does this. Look at his hand. He thinks. 2 minutes. 3 minutes has gone by. Once he calculates it, he plays really fast. It's almost instantaneous. Like he already could, because he's making all these like decisions in his head, like, you know, really fast.
Already gone through the entire decision tree before he played a card.
Exactly. And like, you know, these are the things I pay attention to, right?
Yeah.
So
not studying just the cards and how they're playing the cards, but
also
studying
the
player.
Players yes, because like, you know, there's a reason why certain top players are at the top. Like it's not just like coincidence, right? It's so I pay attention to like how like the better players play because there's something interesting to like learn from them. And I try to emulate all of their styles in the way I currently play Yu-Gi-Oh now. I think it was so funny because Billy, I think when he was commentating my YCS feature match, he was like, dang, Pac was shuffling his hand as if he was about to set his entire hand and then only set one. That's what I would do. And it's so funny because I watched the feature match in which Billy literally did that. So I did, you know what I mean? I subconsciously emulated that. And it was so funny hearing him commentate that in the YCS coverage because, you know, like I'm like subconsciously like doing these like plays that people are doing, you know? So I don't know. It's like I could go on for this forever. There's a whole like subset.
There's a lot to learn from these retro formats.
Yeah, there's a lot to learn. So I'm a huge advocate of retro, of learning, of playing them. And then also just like, you know, I started in 2019. Like for me, this is like, it's fascinating. Like I never got to live through these formats. I never got to play with Honest in my main deck. I never got to play with like freaking, you know, Treeborn Frog. And be able to relive a little bit of piece of history is like cool. Because I watch all these retro profiles now. Be able to play them is a whole nother component. So I have a lot of appreciation for it.
I think that the thing that is lost on a lot of newer players that sometimes people just don't really consider, you know, maybe if they get into Yu-Gi-Oh in 2019, 2020, whatever, they see all this stuff that they can do and they just start doing things, you know? Right. And I think that's something really critical that some of these retro formats really emphasize is the conservation of resources, you know? Yeah. I think that it's so critical to look at a hand of total gas and maybe play into it a little bit more conservatively, understanding that your opponent has hand traps, things like that. You know, save some follow-up and save, you know, make sure that, sure, you can end on 4 synchros, but maybe you end on 2 or 3 with loads of follow-up in your hand if it's a board that kills anyway, right?
Yeah, I have like, it's so funny you mention that because I have examples of this. Like if you watch my top 8 feature match against Amit for YCS Vegas, he made DP against my board and I drew for turn. Like, and I see like not a lot of people doing this where I could have played, like to be honest, I could have played and actually like I could bait the DP and actually try to play. But in my head, I was like, I could try to play now, but if this play doesn't resolve, the DPE gets the +1 off of me because it trades with a card in my hand. And I know he's playing striker, so he can't really kill me unless you like rips Ray off the top, you know? So it's better to just pass here and get the extra draw and then try to make my big push next turn, right? Yeah. And And I did that. I literally did that. And the thing is, I don't like a lot of people like don't know when to like, you know, just pass. Sometimes the best play is just pass and draw an extra card, right? And that's what a lot of retro is actually. If you notice in retro, there's gonna be a lot of opportunities where you could play, but you're like, damn, if I normal summon this and this gets to, like, you know, bottomless or something, I can't play the game. Let me just wait until an extra backround. In GOAT, this happens too, like where I wait until I have judgment and draw into it, and then set the judgment and then try to make the big push. And my opponent might make the read I have judgment now, you know, and they'll get a little bit, they have to be a little bit more aggro now. But like these are like, you know, the type of stuff that you kind of have to think about. Of course, my opponent rips Ray and kills me, but in my head, I wasn't mad because it was still the correct line in my head, because I don't think I was supposed to play that turn. I was supposed to wait and get an extra draw and make one big push, because that one big push would be OTK that turn. Like I would win that same turn. So that's like basically, you know, like that's an example of where, like, you know, something that a lot of players would do in retro is applicable even to today's standards, right? Like, you know, understanding to maybe passing against a control deck is the right play, right? Like against Eldritch, for example, like I would do the same thing sometimes. Sometimes I would just draw my 6 card going second. I can't play, pass, you know, like, and the thing is, they can't really kill you. They might like do a lot and get close, and it, you know, it's a lot easier, harder with like Brave Engine stuff now, but like, you know, waiting for an extra card like actually helps a lot.
Right.
So yeah,
I got one last question.
Yep.
And then we'll answer the questions from the chat. So when you go back and watch these retro, whether it be the duel videos, deck profiles, or whatever, do you have a particular player that you go back and look at in these retro formats and like, is there a player that you think is not necessarily the greatest player of all time, but maybe the most critical thinking or the most cerebral player of all time, something along those lines?
I mean, for me, it's actually funny. I actually watch, like, I think the person I watch that I feel like has really good technical play is definitely Jesse. That's the person that I watch for like really good technical play. Like a lot of his feature matches, I've pretty much seen all of them. He has really good technical play. Like he like makes really good. I feel like he has decision trees, and his logic for like sequencing his hand in certain ways is like really, really good. But in terms of like a player who's like less known, I can't really think of any, because quite frankly, a lot of the feature matches that you see from the past are all like known players. That's the one that ARG usually streams. But I've like watched all of them, and for me, it doesn't really matter who's playing. Quite frankly, like I always try to evaluate like the way they play their hand. I always try to evaluate the way they play into boards and stuff like that. You know, just because like they all like play every person plays very differently. So, you know, there isn't really anyone that comes to mind that is like less known, but I say like for like from the known players, I would say like Jesse's probably the person I would watch the most from like a pure technical player perspective, because I feel like he plays with like a lot of like reasoning and logic. Like I feel like conviction and like logic that goes behind like every card he plays, rather than kind of like boonga boonga, I'm just gonna play like X card for my hand. Like there's actually like thought process that goes behind it, and it makes sense, right? Like, and whenever I try to like, you know, obviously I don't understand his thought process like 100%, but when I see the way he sequences his hand and I think about the order, and I think about like, does this make sense for this card to be first? I'm like, damn, it actually does, right? Because of like all this and this. So I think those are like interesting for me. Like I like those type of like games where you know, I'm like, damn, like it actually makes a lot of sense.
All right, we're gonna power through some questions from the chat.
Sure.
You can just give kind of real quick, like 2-word answers, and we'll just wrap it up because I don't want to hold you too much longer. What do you value more, playing a lesser known deck for the knowledge advantage, or playing a deck considered tier 1 or best of the format?
Wait, so say that again. Like playing a less known deck or a tier 1 deck, you said, right?
Yeah. So something like playing DDD versus maybe playing the pile deck, right?
For me, it's like, you know, like I would for me, I would just play the deck that I think is the best. It could just be the deck that everyone thinks is tier 1 or that is tier 1 or solidified as tier 1. Or it could just be like a deck like DD's, for example, which I think is the best deck from a meta call perspective. It might not be the quote-unquote best deck. It might be the best meta call, if that makes sense. But I typically try to pick the deck that is the best meta call, not the best deck. Because usually the best deck is not the best meta call. Like, and when we talk about best deck, we talk about like the way that YuGiOh players talk about the best deck is usually the decks with the highest ceiling, the deck that does the most. But for me, it's like, like for Dytron, for example, right? At the first YCS remote, it was like Dytron was definitely absurd. Like, there's no doubt from anyone's mind that if that deck goes first, you're probably scrambling. There's also like Tri-Brigade, right? Like, it was a quote unquote one of the best decks because it was very consistent, it was very powerful, right? And I just went with Prank Kids because I think it was the best deck because it can play the most non-engine and have one of the best grind games while also playing, like, it's a deck that no one expected. Some people didn't even Ash the first kid sometimes, bro. You know what I'm saying? Like, like when I was playing that deck at that YCS, there was not a lot of people who was actually even on Prank Kids. And that's kind of like, if you look at my like track history or track record, I typically try to do that when I go to events. I try to play the deck that isn't the best, but the best meta call. And I think all of my like tournament results have all been decks that were quote unquote the best meta call, not the best deck. But in turn, they turn out to be the best deck because they're the best meta call, if that makes sense.
Yep. So is there a deck that is less meta that you have a lot of fun with playing in a more casual setting like locals?
Right now, like, I'm looking into Despia's because, I think without like keeping it 100, without the new structure deck cards yet and the new Albaz fusion or Despia fusion, the deck is pretty weak right now, but I just like that it's a very interactive deck. Like, I don't really, bro, I end on Masquerade that burns you for 600 pass. Like, it's not really that crazy. And with better hands, I end on Chimera as well that pops cards, right? Like, I really enjoy those type of like very interactive decks. Like, I love, like, for example, playing BA. There was a format where like full power try was happening, and I was playing BA. Or like and like those are like the type of decks that I really, really like. There was like just to go back on the idea of like, playing meta calls, there was an event for a giant card where I played pure Trap Lich, just complete infinite trap cards and L-Lich, and the meta at that time was Dragon Link ending on the Buster Lock, right? That was the meta. And I like, when I played that deck, I was like, Dragon Link is the best deck, but I think I'm playing the deck that is the best meta call because that Dragon Link mirror was like atrocious. You got to think about it. You got to keep it in the back of your head too. If you're playing the deck that quote unquote is the best deck, everyone else probably thinks that too. Everyone else probably thinks Dragon Link's the best deck, or everyone else probably thinks like X deck is the best, right? So now you have to consider a couple things. First of all, how does this deck fare in the mirror? If the mirror is like hella toxic where you roll the dice for game 1, then man, I don't know if I want to play that deck, to be honest.
Right.
And the Ellis deck that I played was a deck that didn't matter if I lost the dice roll because I just set 5. And when they were using Buster, when they were trying to do the Buster Lock, they committed a lot of resources to do that. And quite frankly, it doesn't do anything to my deck, right? So and that's where like the idea of like a broken line came in, because like when you lose the roll, you set it in front of a Savage. It wasn't a card designed to go first, but when you go first with it, you mind game like the column. And when you go second with it, you set in front of the card like Savage and you win. Same thing with Witch's Strike, right? Like it was a card that like I knew that if I was going second, they had Savage up, and they negated any of my torrentials. I just activate this, which is basically another torrential, but even better. But they have to negate it, right? So, like that's why like it's all about just making the right meta calls. I feel like would usually be more likely for you to win the event rather than just do okay at it.
All right, I got one last question that I'm gonna ask. Is the most important one of the night.
Sure.
How often do you change them sleeves, dude?
Bro, every locals, every event.
Every locals or every event. Oh, come on. It's got to be every night with how much
Yeah,
you're playing and
like
shuffling.
I play so much, so like I do go through sleeves like like candy.
Man's buying them by the case.
Yeah, so it's definitely it's bad. Like I think they don't make PCs anymore. That's like my favorite sleeve, the original PCs. Like they just
Yeah.
there's just no shuffle that compares to that. Like, and the shuffle is just like crazy. Like it's not one of those things that it's just hyped. It's like actually crazy. Those sleeves are like insane.
Yeah, I'll send you my address after, and you can send me some. I'll test them out.
Yeah. No, like I'm like, damn, dude. Like at some point, I think I'm gonna have to like start buying Dragon Shields, because I'm burning through these PCs. I have like 2 cases, which is like 60 packs, but they disappear. And with IRL YCS just announced, I don't think I'm gonna be using PCs ever until that YCS.
Yeah.
Just
That's fair.
just from a discipline perspective, right? Like I'm just gonna use Dragon Shields in the meantime. When that YCS comes out, man, I'm pulling that fresh pack of PCs out, and my goodness.
Feels so good.
My goodness.
Yeah, man, just buy some stock in like Dragon Shield.
Yeah, true.
The real question is, do you not play the 60 card decks? That way you only have to open 1 pack of those sleeves?
That's exactly it. That's exactly it. There's no way I waste 2 OG PCs on a 60 card deck, bro. Okay. That's like $60 just a sleeve. Just a sleeve of deck. So,
True.
No way.
All right, so we always end every episode with a podcast question of the day.
Sure.
And we'll answer the last one, which is, are there any changes on the OCG Forbidden
Forbidden limited list.
Yeah, I get talking too fast. That you would like to see put into place here in the TCG? A lot of people said they would like to see Verte banned. We had some people saying Fractal to 2. Give me back the wind-up ship is something that we got a lot. And limiting down the Brave stuff was also something pretty popular. Is there any one particular thing off the top of your head that you would like to see that they did over there?
Yeah, like they should just ban the Brave engine. It makes no sense to have those cards as 1-ofs. Like 1 Enchantress, 1 Rights. It's just so weird. Like I never understood that. I think all the stuff that's like toxic should just be banned. Right? So because I think like
Pretty
what
fair.
OCG, like the way their ban lists work is they kind of like mitigate the damage, but they don't really solve the issue. Like, I remember when they put VFD to 1, or did they put it VFD to 2? I forgot. I think they put VFD to 2 in one of the formats, or maybe 1. I forgot. And I was just like, what did this accomplish? I'm still seeing people VFDing each other, and like it didn't change anything.
Yeah.
Like even VFD to 1 was like disgusting. So for me, like I don't play in the OCG, so like the way they do their ban list doesn't really affect me, to be honest. But if I was playing in the OCG, like all these toxic cards, all these like whatever, they should just be banned. There's no reason to have like a 1-of. It just makes it too sacky, right? Like I also think cards like Call By and Crossout, ironically enough, should be banned too, just because I think combo decks or decks that have access to stop hand traps are really cancer, because the design of hand traps is to, keep combo decks in check. But if combo decks have access to cards like Call By and Crossout, it doesn't actually make sense. Like, what's the point of making hand traps are? Like, so I think those cards like shouldn't be like. I think OCG has Crossout at 2 or 1, and Call By at 1 or 2. I don't remember the exact. But I think they should just be banned. I mean, this could be like, I guess, a hot take, but it's just that like I just think that combo decks are supposed to be kept in check by hand traps, but they aren't kept in check because they have these like Call By or Crossouts that just, make it so they do their combo anyways. And if you watch any OCG replay, when they do their full combo, you never win. Like, it's impossible. The other guy, I mean, for content, just tries to play it out. He goes like normal summon Snow, pass, and then dies next turn. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's not like, it's like insane copium if you think that you can break the board, because you gotta understand, these OCG combos are crazy. Like, people have access to God knows what, you know what I'm saying?
Everything.
So if they resolve their loop, you can pack up your cards, and Crossout and Call By are like toxic at making that happen. That's why, like, I think having Maxi at 3 in the OCG, but Call By and Crossout ban would actually feel like somewhat healthier for the game. But who knows, man? I can be completely wrong on that. I just think that the design of hand traps to stop like combo decks don't actually work when cards like Crossout and Call By are in the format. So
And today's podcast question of the day, this will be the one that goes up Friday when we launch the episode, is how do you feel about the 45-minute rounds at the YCSs? I personally am a big fan of a couple extra minutes. I think that the new time rules mitigate a lot of the rounds lasting an insanely long time. Not everybody likes the new time rules, which I get, but I think that these 45-minute rounds is a really nice balance.
I think it's a good balance, and I think that the only advice that I would have for people playing with the new 45-minute rule is don't let that make you think that you actually have a lot more time, because like scooping strategically still matters. Knowing when to like pack up your cards is really important. Like there would be so many times where I would lose in time, and I would never get too mad at my opponent because I always think about it. I'm like, damn, I should have scooped faster. There was at the Goofy Gauntlet this past weekend, I almost lost in time because when I looked up at the clock and I'm playing the 30-minute game 1 out, I'm like, dude, what the heck? I need to scoop right now, and that's what I did. Like I'm like, bro, I have to scoop. I saw the timer too late, and to be quite honest, I thought I was gonna lose in time, and I was ready to take the L for that and be the one to blame because I should have scooped earlier. Like, you know what I'm saying? And the only reason I didn't was I think it could be winnable, but the odds of me trying to win this isn't that high. But it could be winnable, but it's not that high. You know what I'm saying? So these are still factors that you still have to take into consideration. Like don't take the 5 minutes for granted because it goes by pretty fast or pretty slow depending who you play against. So we'll see.
Yeah. Well, that's going to wrap it up for us. Thank you so much for coming on. And I mean, we took way more of your time than we planned. I'm really sorry about that.
No, of course. Anytime. I'm happy to do this.
Yeah. So just closing, be sure to check out our sponsor. Be sure to check out our playmat on Imperium. Be sure to check out all of our links. They'll all be down in the description. Our episodes go up every Tuesday and every Friday.
8 a.m.
Yep, 8 a.m. Well, Central Time, every Tuesday and Friday.
Yeah.
So thank you all so much for listening, and have a great weekend, everyone.
Take care, everybody.